I'll start off by saying that I don't have any nostalgic attachments to the series. I finished the original Zone of the Enders on the PS2 back in 2014. It was a game that took inspiration from the anime classic Neon Genesis Evangelion. However, it really fell flat on almost everything. The best things about the original were the neat mecha designs and excellent in-game presentation. Other than that, it was a really uninteresting experience that happened to have been inspired by media that appealed to me. Anyway, I heard the sequel is much better, so today, I'll be reviewing the PS3 remaster of Zone of the Enders, the second runner. You play as a Mars space miner with a dark past named Dingo. Thankfully, he isn't a whiny child like Leo from the previous game, but his name just sounds silly to me. Why Dingo? Anyway, he finds an abandoned orbital frame called Jehuty. Inside the frame, he encounters an AI named Ada. Both Jehuty and Ada were part of the first game, but I honestly didn't feel like they contributed much this time other than the convenience of reusing the same mecha model and AI voice as the previous title. Eventually, Dingo meets Ken and Nomen. Ken acts as a sort of double agent / love interest, while Nomen acts like a batshit crazy lunatic villain. Anyway, Nomen just shoots Dingo and Ken decides to save him. This results in Dingo being tied to Jehuty in an adventure like many others. Honestly, Nomen should have just ended Dingo right then and there. I really wanted to like the story, but it didn't flow well with me. Nothing in the narrative really felt all that memorable. The game has these superficial Metal Gear Solid nods, however, the storytelling never got as experimental or meaningful as something from kooky old Kojima. Along with the uninteresting narrative, the characters really didn't resonate with me. First we have rugged cool guy Dingo with his mysterious past and him essentially being hospitalized in a mecha. The premise of a man being forced in a mecha in order to stay alive is neat. It's a real shame that they didn't make the most of it. Other than a couple of bad lines about RA being dead once before, it didn't add much besides a justification for why Dingo never leaves Jehuty. Next, we have Ken, who starts off somewhat interesting but then ends up being pathetic and boring. By the second half, she can't do anything but ask for help from Dingo. She arbitrarily loses her orbital frame and then becomes a damsel in distress not long after. Ken just isn't a good character, and if anyone has any counterpoints to this, I'm certainly open to new perspectives. Sure, she does explain her motives and all that, but it came off as just plain uninteresting. Finally, we have the big Bad Nomen. He's really just a generic villain with a cheesy bad guy voice and a comically evil face. There's nothing special about him other than how dumb he was not to have completely murdered Dingo right then and there. I also feel the need to mention that Leo's back, but he's as lame as ever, maybe even a little worse. I mean, Ken could have taken his spot and the story probably would have been better for it. Sure, you'd have to rewrite the story a bit, but at least Ken wouldn't be so useless. The least they could have done was make Leo more interesting. Sure, he's competent now, but he just kinda sucks. There are also some other side characters, but they were completely one-dimensional and generally not worth talking about. The bland characters coupled with the generic shonen anime adventure left a bad taste in my mouth. The lost potential of tying Jehuty to Dingo, the poor utilization of Leo and Ken, and the lack of true narrative intrigue really left me wanting more. Luckily, the gameplay systems left a much better impression on me. So the second runner takes the gameplay from the original and adds some much needed polish and depth to the formula. The game provides a fast-paced action experience that was pretty unique at the time of its release. I played the game on normal mode and occasionally struggled on some of the boss fights and levels. The combat plays pretty intuitively. The developers devised a natural approach to traveling in the Z direction through the X and triangle buttons. It really works like a charm. The function of the primary attack button is altered depending on the context. Attacking from afar results in a ranged attack, while attacking up close can link into a 4-hit combo. Running mixes it up as well, but it's very much standard fare in that regard. Even the charge attack works differently depending on the range. However, I don't particularly like how being in charge mode halts mobility. The combat gets incredibly hectic, so pulling off a charge slash in a combo was difficult at times. The 4-hit combo in the second runner allows the player to control where they knock the enemy. They can push them up, down, or forward, which ties into the wall mechanic. If you knock an enemy into a wall, ceiling, or floor, they'll take additional damage, adding an extra layer of depth to the experience. Generally speaking, I had trouble timing the last hit of the 4-hit combo for slashing the enemy up or down. The timing just felt off to me when compared to something like Dynasty Warriors. Anyway, Jehuty has the ability to use a whole cavalcade of sub-weapons. These weapons add a whole range of variety to the combat, while draining the sub-gauge in varying degrees. Gaining new sub-weapons would often transform the experience substantially, which was a huge plus for me. It made me extremely eager to unlock all the game's sub-weapons. By the end, the gameplay had shifted so drastically that it hardly resembled the start of the game in terms of combat flow. Though the systems in place were pretty well crafted, I wasn't very fond of the enemy design. At its heart, the game fits in the spectacle fighter genre, though it certainly leans on the shallow side. Unfortunately, the difficulty curve wasn't very smooth. It's messy, though my main gripe was with the early fight against Fake Viper. The developers basically demanded that the players get really good at dodging projectiles and attacking aggressively. Playing defensively during this fight was absolute suffering. It resulted in a battle of attrition every single time. This boss fight made me quit the first time around, and it made me hesitant to return this time. It was a boss fight that came too early and was too hard. They didn't even provide many options in the form of sub-weapons. It didn't help that I'd have to hear Leo's annoying voice during battle and whenever it was game over. Admittedly, I do like that you get to hear the characters reacting to your demise. It's a neat addition that vaguely reminded me of Metal Gear. Anyway, some bosses would randomly amp up the difficulty and it would be more of a memorization test rather than one based on skill. I just wasn't fond of the second runner's boss fights. My greatest issue with the bosses is that they're invincible way too often without much of an indicator. No More Heroes did a lot better, as that game made it very clear when you wouldn't be able to damage or stun a boss. In the second runner, a lot of hits that definitely look like they'd land just arbitrarily get dodged. Sometimes, they just can't take any damage. This drove my patience and was further accentuated by how much health many of the bosses had. They felt way too spongy for my taste, and the lack of depth in the gameplay limited my mental engagement. Anyway, when it comes to the basic enemies, most of them are pushovers when utilizing the easily abusable grab attack. Sure, there's much more enemy variety than before, but they get wrecked all the same. Just look at this carnage. I mean, the grab provides invulnerability during the spin animation, while doing close range area of effect damage and providing a powerful projectile at the end. It's probably the safest combat option. The trick I usually went with was to shoot the enemies, thereby forcing them to block, and then grabbing them. It was very formulaic, but effective against most hordes. The devs tried to mix things up with a variety of enemies, but most of the time, it felt like the same old routine. One time, they tried to mix things up with environmental hazards, and that was a real train wreck. That's because of the iffy camera and lock-on system, which made it more irritating than challenging. To be fair, the camera is up against a fast and frantic mecha flying all over the place. It's not awful, there are just those special moments that made it really hard to play properly at times. Yes, there is a radar that shows incoming projectiles, but most of the time, it was hard to gauge how long it would take for the projectile to arrive. The game usually relies on the lock-on system to take care of enemy engagements. It works alright, but it's ineffectual when dealing with enemies from all sides. Switching from enemy to enemy feels natural, but during more complex situations, it's kinda crap. When I want to pick off a specific target from a group, it's not as easy as a simple lock-on. The lock-on just doesn't work when the game throws too many enemies at you. Also, when I want to disengage from the enemy, it takes too long to break away from the lock-on. Zone of the Ender's lock-on system is a great example of what I don't want in a lock-on system. Despite my negativity, the camera and lock-on really excel at making the action look insanely cool. If there's anything that genuinely impresses me about the second runner, it's the visuals. The game provides one of the best spectacles I've ever encountered in an action game. The fighting just looks so cinematic and engaging, despite how mechanically simple it actually is. It's further enhanced by the sheer quality of the art style. The mechas look absolutely stunning, and they're lovingly animated to a T. They took away the cruddy 3D character models from the original and went all out with the anime aesthetic. It looks great, and I especially like the anime codec calls. They add a lot to the already excellent visual presentation. All the 2D animation is impressive, and I'm surprised that more games haven't gone with this approach. Aside from the visuals, the audio is solid. I really like the high-octane combat music. Also, the vocal tracks were fantastic as they added a strange otherworldly feeling that mixed well with the Egyptian god-inspired mechas. The voice acting could have used some work, but it's still a PS2 game at heart, which provides it some leeway. Anyway, I think it's time to sum up the experience. Zone of the Enders has always been an iffy series for me, but the second runner really does improve on the original. Though it's not really my cup of tea mechanically or in terms of narrative, it's still a cool mecha romp that really brings a solid anime experience to the table. Admittedly, the sub-weapons really stood out to me, but the gameplay easily boiled down to spam and grab. Regardless, there was a lot of effort put into the game, and they really went all out with correcting the flaws of the original. The second runner provides a polished mecha experience that I'd probably suggest on easy mode in order to reduce the spongy boss factor. I was genuinely fond of the presentation, but the rest of the game just didn't win me over. Overall, it's not bad, but it's not that great either. It's still worth playing though if you have the time and interest for it. Thanks for watching the review. If you enjoyed it, feel free to like the video and consider subscribing to my channel. If you want more, here are some of my other videos. Anyway, I'll see you all next time when I review my life decisions.